Hey crew, it's now a little after 9, and I'm on the road heading to Portland for a workshop this afternoon. I wanted to actually talk to you a little bit and tell you about the workshop that I attended yesterday in Phoenix, or Scottsdale, as you so aptly pointed out. So I was attending this workshop for chief information officers and how to be more effective in providing leadership and supporting strategic interests of the organization. And the interesting thing about this, and it was taught by a guy who's got a PhD, who's a professor, I don't know, South Carolina or something, it was very business oriented. It was very much structured around the traditional business values of competition and the idea that your goal is to make money, and that's the goal. And so, as a chief information officer, you should be structuring your projects. Basically, what he said is you should. He provided a metric that you would use to calculate the value of any project you do to the organization, the monetary value of it, and essentially you can calculate a rate of return on that, on your project, and that you should prioritize. Essentially, what he said was you should really prioritize your projects by rate of return, by this metric. Now, I didn't really have a problem with that, but then he talked about how you get buy-in to get projects done, and he talked about something called key performance indicators, and basically the idea that you simplify the job that people are doing by a single metric that is most demonstrative of their value to the organization. So, I mean, you probably know about key performance indicators. I hadn't heard the term before, but it's not a new concept really. So he was talking about, in most businesses, a key performance indicator is your return on your stocks. So, the dividends that are paid. That's the KPI for a COO or CEO. For a CFO, Chief Financial Officer, the KPI is the return on investment. So, he was saying that, there's some corporations that require an 85% return on investment as a benchmark for their KPI. So anyway, marketing, your KPO is sales, or your KPI. So anyway, he talked to, he really simplified things to these basic statistics, and I think that that's a good way to generate goals and get you moving in the correct direction. But the interesting thing about the conversation that we had was we started out talking about how to get a project approved and how to get it going. And so he was basically saying, you calculate your IRR, your internal return rate, IRR, but you have to create sort of consensus among your management team. And then you sell it to the CFO based on high return rate, but the interesting thing was, I said, well, why wouldn't you go and talk to the CFO about what you'd like to do, what projects you're trying to work on, discuss the benefits and discuss a methodology for calculating your IRR, so that because what he was saying is, you should get consensus from other people in the organization and take them to the CFO, and you, but you don't talk to the CFO about it. And the reason you don't do that is because the CFO, there's two types of benefits he categorized as tangible and intangible benefits. And tangible benefits are the ones that you can readily put dollar amounts on that are easily agreed upon by staff. So if you've got something that you know is going to eliminate one staff position, you can that's a tangible benefit. However, if you're estimating increased sales, that's an intangible benefit, because there's going to be arguments about that. So he was saying that the CFO will automatically zero out your intangible benefits. He won't believe any of them, and so when he's calculating return on investment, he'll only use the tangible benefits, and the intangible benefits generally are the greatest, which is true, I think. But I just, it was really weird, because he basically talked about how you need to play this game where you give small amounts of information to the different management team members to try to sell them on their parts of the project, and you don't talk to the CFO until you have a bunch of them lined up, and you have them estimate the benefits to them based on, giving them small amounts of information, and then you bring it all together and you kind of bring it into the CFO, and you say, well, the marketing director says it's going to save $10 million. The sales guy says it's going to increase sales this much money, and you give him that so that he can't argue with your intangible benefits as much. And if you come in with an intangible benefits that you've generated an estimate, what he said is that nobody's going to listen to you because there's a conflict of interest. You are going to be perceived as wanting to build your own little empire, and therefore nobody's going to listen to you if you propose a project that's going to cost the organization money. And I listened to all this, and I'm just like, God, what kind of world do you frickin' live in, where every single person on your management team, everybody you work with closely, is seen as an adversary. You maintain those relationships adversarially. It just bugged me. And then he started talking about how you manage your program, your department or whatever. And he said, you have a choice of being a cost center CIO or a profit center CIO. Cost center CIO means you're costing the organization money, even if you're providing services that are valuable to them. But a profit center CIO means that you're making money for the organization. And so, everyone views you as making money for the organization. And he said, it's much harder to be a profit center CIO, but that's really what you should be doing, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, the thing about being a profit center CIO is that you'll generally do fewer projects involving basic infrastructure for your organization, and you'll do more projects that push the envelope and bring in extra income from outside. And I said, well, isn't that unsustainable? Because, the crazy thing about that, to me, is that you create a Department of Information Technology because you need some basic services. The flow of information within your organization is what allows your organization to be successful. And what he's essentially saying is that you should neglect the flow of information within your organization, or you should deprioritize it based on if you can make more money providing services that are going to bring in money from outside the organization. So it sounds to me like what he's advocating is essentially getting away from the core mission of your organization and doing other things because it makes more money in the short term. And I just don't. When I asked the question, I said, well, isn't that going to eventually undermine your organization and come back to bite you? And he said, no, it's not. And that was basically all he said. He said, if that happens, you're doing it wrong. And I'm like, what does that mean? You know. So, and the funny thing is, like, the mission statement of our IT department is to facilitate the flow of information for the beneficial use of the organization for tribal staff and to have a positive impact on tribal members' lives. Well, those are all intangible benefits, you know. Those are things that you can't, you can't put a dollar amount on that everybody's going to agree with. And so if I abandon that and start looking at what we could do in IT is we could say, okay, we're going to start an ISP, an internet service provider. We're going to start, all these enterprise type actions that are going to look cool, are going to have, corporate logos on them, are going to have people outside the organization paying for them. But what that means is we're going to neglect, the basic functions of governance. And it's funny because if you look at IT and other tribes that have taken that approach, that's exactly what's happened. The Warm Springs tribe turned their IT into an enterprise, and now, we had a couple guys from their GIS up here, and they do all their own IT work because they have to pay for it through their enterprise in order to get it, and they don't want to do that. They'd much rather have their guys do it in-house, even though it's bad for the organization as a whole. If you look at the Coeur d'Alene tribe, they've got a really good IT department, but they've really focused on creating a telecom and doing content creation and all kinds of crazy stuff. And the IT infrastructure in the organization is not very good, and people are frustrated with it, and they work around the IT department. And we have obviously some people work around our IT department as well, and we have our problems. But I just can't imagine that model being successful in tribal government. Now, maybe in a business it's successful. Maybe it makes you look good as a CIO, but I don't think that, maybe it positions you to be more entrepreneurial and to get other jobs, which he actually did say he said a profit center CIO is going to be more competitive for other jobs in other areas. It's going to make you more valuable. It's going to be good for your career. And I'm like, but that's not what, there's a reason you have an IT department, and it's not to go out and, unless you're an IT company, your job is not to, be selling IT services or making money off of IT services. Your job is to use IT as a tool to strengthen the core business functions of your organization. Anyway, and I don't know. I suppose I could have a conversation with this guy, and he probably is overstating his case deliberately, and he probably wouldn't argue with a lot of things I've said, but I don't know. Anyway, I'm probably way over time, so I will stop this video and maybe do another one later. Until I talk to you again, I'm still dead.